Hey guys, Ponce here to talk to you guys about the Mordekaiser rework and the experiences I've had with him over the past few weeks. For a champion that has been released or reworked in the last little while, I actually played him quite a bit, given that I've enjoyed him compared to, numerous other releases. So I feel I have a good amount of experience to draw upon to talk about this sort of stuff. So in the next little bit, I'm going to talk about generally how he plays, kind of the role he fills, and then I'm going to talk about builds and slightly more specific stuff after that. So, AFK warning. Let's move the character around a bit. First off, I guess he talks a lot, but in any case, so yeah, in terms of how he actually plays, he is a juggernaut. There's really no kind of ifs, ands, or buts about that. He's just a straight up juggernaut. He plays very much like one. Very, very similar to kind of like Darius in terms of his general role and like where he's going to be positioned and how he's going to be using his abilities and where he wants to kind of be, I guess. He wants to get right into the enemy, wants to stay there, and once he gets there, it's he's pretty good at staying there. It's a bit difficult to get him off you in a sense, especially given his ult and all that. But getting there is probably, that's the general juggernaut issue. It's getting after the person. If the person's smart about it, it's going to be somewhat difficult to actually engage on the person. It's kind of on them to keep you away from them. So again, just like really any other juggernaut, though he does have ways in. Obviously got a pull. There's certain items you can build to make things handy. There's summoner spells, etc., etc. There's your ult, obviously. But in any case, nothing too revolutionary going on there in terms of his playstyle and all that. He's a juggernaut. Play him like Darius, and you're probably not too far off. Aside from that, though, he does actually remind me, it's not like he's Darius exactly. He does have his own AP flavor to things. He actually reminds me quite a bit. Let's move the character around so we don't get knocked off the game again. He does remind me of... Jesus Christ, shut up, Mord. He does really remind me of, like, old Mordekaiser. I'm talking, like, Season 0. So before Seasons existed into Season 1 kind of Mordekaiser, before they gutted him with nerfs and then pretended they didn't by saying we're actually buffing him. They didn't, and removed a bunch of items or changed a bunch of items from the game that were core to that sort of playstyle, which is, so I suppose this is a good point to segue into builds and stuff. So we'll talk about items in a sec. Before we do that, something slightly more plain. You can do a bunch of things with his runes and masteries. I feel like there's actually a good amount of space to play with that. Personally, I've found Conquerors to be the best for me, but I've also tested things like Predator if I have to go in the jungle. By the way, I'm not going to talk about jungle other than just don't do it. It's not very good. It's like not bad, but you're negating. Well, maybe I'll talk a bit more about it later. But it's just not good. It nullifies all the advantages of a juggernaut, and you can do it, but why do that when you can play him in lane? That's the gist of it if I don't get back to jungling. In any case, so yeah, I've enjoyed Conquerors the most, but what else have I tried? I also tried the Grasp thing. The thing gives you HP stacks. Like I said, Predator. I even tried the New Age Thunderlords. What's it called again? Electrocute. I've tried Hail of Blades, which wasn't too bad, just to get his passive going faster. So there's a bunch of things you can do, but just Conquerors seems to work up straight up the best with him for me. And the rest of this doesn't matter nearly as much. I went Triumph, Legend Tenacity, Coup de Grace, but this is pretty whatever. More importantly, actually, in terms of the actual runes you pick, come from the secondary tree. I take Transcendence because, and I'm going to talk about this more when we get into items, but CDR is probably the single most important stat on him. Like, I'm not saying that he doesn't have other important stats, but if you had to pick just one stat, CDR is, like, absolutely fundamental on the character. We'll talk about that more in a bit. Nullifying Orb, okay, you can just sort of do whatever you want there, but I like Nullifying Orb, make the tanky guy even more annoying to take down. Why not, right? So for the runes, I went, so the stat runes, I went CDR, again, based on level. I'm not a huge fan of it because it takes 10 CDR to get, level 18 to get to 10 CDR. But again, CDR is just so damn important on the character, I'm willing to bite the bullet and, tone down his early game a bit. Which is a bit unfortunate because his really early levels aren't like that strong. They're not bad, but he's not like the strongest duelist in the game kind of thing. He's no Trundle or whatever. But I don't know. I think ultimately it sort of outweighs the drawbacks, just because again CDR is so damn important, and it's a little bit annoying to get in terms of his his build, especially if you want it early. You gotta keep the character moving around. And lastly, I just take armor, but you know, like you can tailor that to the game. All right, so now perhaps the more important bit, items. So items actually took me a little while to figure out what I was super comfortable with on the character and what I actually wanted. Just because AP or manaless AP bruisers kind of really get screwed over in terms of itemization. It feels like they're actually balanced to an extent by that, because there's so many wasted stats with a bunch of mana items, etc., etc. I think the closest thing I found to core on him was Rylai's. I was a bit hesitant to do it because I'm not the hugest fan of the item, but it just kind of has all the stuff he wants. You want at least one pseudo-offensive item at minimum. It's somewhat defensive, and if he actually gets up to someone, it really means the enemy's not going to get away. People have trouble getting away from him anyway, but this really makes him just sort of stick to people. And now there are other items for that, which we'll talk about in a minute. So I'm just going to quickly go through other stuff. First, Merc boots. I'd liked, you know what we can do? We can make Mordekaiser shut up. I probably should have done this at the beginning. There we go. Boots you have a whole bunch of options with. Again, it depends on the game. It's very context-based, like with most characters, or a lot of characters, I should say. So, Merc Treads, if you need the game with Merc Treads. CC really does screw him over. It's, again, like old Mordekaiser. He can kind of just stay there almost indefinitely, I feel like, if you're doing well. The one thing that can kind of mess him up is CDR, because it just sort of stops the engine from perpetuating itself, essentially. If you really want it, there's a lot of auto attackers. Ninja no Tabi is good. If you can afford it without having any kind of defensive options, Sork shoes I've done in the past. It's nice if you can actually get Sork shoes just because Pen is so good with him, like old Mordekaiser. I've a few instances I've actually done swiftness boots because the game called for it. And that's kind of it. I haven't really done anything else. But yeah, there you have it for boots. I would say the second thing, or the item I built the second most, ends up actually being Zanya's. I'm not a huge fan of the item on him, but he wants to be tanky, he wants CDR, he wants some damage. The stasis thing is nice. It's not, the most crucial thing on him, but it's nice. It allows for his cooldowns to come back. You can maybe get multiple shields off in a fight, etc., etc. It's not bad. And it's just because, especially in the top lane, you're encountering so much physical damage, and just in games in general. Most of the damage I've been encountering, again, maybe this is a PB thing, probably not, but just so much physical damage everywhere that this just happens to be the tanky offensive item that doesn't have mana on it, that ends up working with him. And again, CDR, need that CDR. So once we get this, we're working at 30% CDR, between all the runes and mastery stuff. But so speaking of CDR, another item here, Spirit Massage. This is probably my favorite magic resistance item on him. Mordekaiser actually seems to work best when he is facing like a full magic damage team. He really kind of messes those up. Again, much like old Mordekaiser. Old Mordekaiser. Not, this intermittent, they kept reworking me and weird janky crap. Itemization is definitely one of the reasons I keep harping on the fact that he really resembles old Mordekaiser. So if you end up fighting a team that's just full AP damage, not very much AD damage, maybe there's like they didn't do an AD carry, or their AD carry's behind, or you don't have to worry about the AD carry because you can outduel them anyway. It's really nice if you can go something like Spirit Massage and Banshee's Veil. That gives you 40% CDR between everything. And if you really want more magic resistance, you can keep getting more. And really, the enemy just can't seem to kill you once you get going. You reach that like tanky threshold where you just don't die. Especially coupled with the shield. Now, in terms of other items that work with him, Morellonomicons, depending on the game, can be nice. Again, it's another offensive item on a character who really wants to have a certain tanky threshold. So, just because damage largely takes care of itself, you do want a bit, but a bit too much, it starts to become redundant. Especially because of the Magic Pen. So Magic Pen really works with him well, as I was saying, like old Mordekaiser just sort of, works with its passive, because it's percent damage, and, all that stuff. But, yeah, in any case, Grievous Wounds, of course, if they have a lot of healing, that's nice, it's like, well, you're not healing now. What else? I've heard people say go Leandries. I've never personally done it because, and this is one possible onion in the ointment in terms of sort of the general balance discussions I want to talk about. And I've mentioned this in the past. It's the same with every champion, every rework on the PBE. The PBE is actually a very bad place to test fine balance because for the most part, people on the PBE are not very good, or there's just a very big skill gap, and it's just sort of all over the place. So a lot of the games are just, once I figured out what was going on, tend to steamroll pretty hard, and I kind of fell into a comfortable role with being a certain degree of tanky, and I never really needed too much damage. I could see theoretically Leandries being good in a game where there's a lot of very tanky people and you're dealing a lot of damage over time, but Mordekaiser surprisingly deals a lot of damage very quickly, even with a very limited amount of AP. I would say even just, for example, Rylai's and Zhonya's, with that, you're good to go. If I even threw in like a Morellonomicons, that's just really extra a lot of the time. And so again, Leandries just kind of feels like he deals too much damage to really take advantage of it, to me anyway, in my experience. Other items that kind of work with him, you know, sometimes really anything that they list here is sort of okay. There have been games where I wanted Warmogs, even Dead Man's Plate, get you to run into people. Proto Belt, I think people were overselling how good they thought Proto Belt was in theory when they were watching. They were like, oh, Proto Belt looks good, and I tried it a few times. It's not bad. It's just, it's not bad to like just be able to get in and all that, but again, it's just coming at the cost of certain other items and that tanky threshold, which is the really important thing with him. You know, you can pull some weird stuff off, like, you know, you kind of dash in and then, you know, do a pull and it catches people off guard. But on this, in a similar note, Gunblade. Let's talk about Gunblade. Gunblade isn't bad. It's another one of those items that people just immediately thought about and were like, hey, you should test out Gunblade. I think it'd be good. And I did test it, and it's not bad. The major issue is the build path. You got to build this crappy AD. And it's mainly just like a duelist item, where, you know, so where it's most useful is going to be in the lane. So you're just kind of like, oh, there's a person who's running away. They're not going to run away now. I use it on them. I walk into them. You're probably going to kill them because you're Mordekaiser, and if you walk into someone, you die. Again, like very similar to Darius. But again, it's the build path is the problem, and it sort of makes it. It's like something that's not necessary on him, but makes the dueling process easy. It's kind of like a cheat almost, in a sense. So, you know, if you know what you're doing and you're clever about stuff, you can get those openings and then make your way in, especially given how long that is. It's a bit on the slow side, but you're clever about it. You're eventually going to land something. You probably should get the kill. The Gunblade, all it really does is like almost guarantees that you get that kill by just hitting someone squishier and then walking into them and using it. So again, if you want sort of it's almost like a crutch in a sense. Like that's probably the better way of putting it. If you want it, I'm not going to say don't build it. It makes things simpler, and it is a very crutch-like item. So, yeah, there's that. But keep in mind the drawbacks, which is, I suppose, how I decided what I ultimately like on the character, is there's a lot of good things, but what sets the really good items, or efficient items on him, apart from the other items, is how many drawbacks does the item have. Rylai's, the major drawback is it doesn't have CDR, but that's it. You know, Spirit Visage, the drawback is, well, how much do you need magic resistance? And then there's a bunch of like mana items on them that become super inefficient, which I wish could have been an option. For example, like maybe you know, just because there's so much CDR on it, Iceborne Gauntlet, or, you know, stuff like that. You start to get into too much inefficiency. And again, there's like items that, depending on the game, are more efficient or less efficient, and that kind of thing. But yeah, so the main takeaway from this is, what I'm going to say is, think old Mordekaiser if you played back then. Prioritize CDR, tankiness, Magic Pen where you can get it. Magic Pen is a lot harder than it used to be to get. There was a lot more Magic Pen way back in the day. So maybe might be a bit difficult to get from that. But yeah, CDR, tankiness, Magic Pen if you can get it, and you know, some AP you do want to be throwing in there. And again, tankiness is context dependent. Some games you want more health, some games you're going to want more armor, some games you want more magic resistance. You don't need me to tell you that. That's pretty basic stuff. Now, in terms of matchups, I haven't actually personally run into many things that I feel like give Mordekaiser a problem in lane. In terms of an actual game, if you are, you play a billion games and then you finally encounter a team that's actually smart, that knows how to kite and stuff, that can be pretty frustrating. People who just continuously disengage, that can be annoying to deal with. General Juggernaut problems, you don't need to get specifics on Mordekaiser with that. But in terms of actual lane matchups, I can theorize what might give me problems. Because nothing really gave me problems. But again, it's the PBE. And the thing is, the things I'm going to list, I actually fought in the PBE and I beat the crap out of them. But it's the PBE. I feel like Olaf would be pretty annoying to deal with because he can poke you out. He's got really strong, like, in-fight brawling after he's poked you out. His ult negates your ult just totally. Interestingly, if you cast your ult on them and he uses his ult, it gets rid of your ult. But if he casts his ult, just sort of for a counterplay thing, if he casts his ult first, you can ult him after, and then, he goes into the Death Realm or the Shadow Realm or whatever. So there is that. I've heard people say Darius would counter him. I haven't, again, found that to be personally my experience, but again, PBE, it was probably the most common, or one of the more common things I encountered on the PBE, maybe because there was a perception that it counters it, or someone on YouTube or a big streamer says it counters it, I don't know. Again, I just beat the tar out of it, but it's the PBE. That matchup I can really kind of actually see going either way. I feel like it's actually probably at a base level. I can see why people might say Darius might counter him. Because if they just kind of go at each other and then like brainlessly mash into one another and, things aren't particularly creative in terms of the gameplay, probably Darius wins out with raw numbers. But I feel like Mordekaiser, with his longer range and all that, has room to sort of whittle him out and just outplay over time, in a sense. So again, I can see that kind of going either way, but maybe at a basic level, Darius sort of edges that matchup out. I'm not really sure. Really, anything that can kind of play keep away and poke out can be annoying, but especially in lane, you might think of something like, oh, maybe I'll just play Teemo or, an AD carry or something. There reaches a point when the squishy type things just can't deal with anymore because he'll ult you and just walk into you. So it's kind of similar to, here's a weird analogy you guys might not encounter so much. But Yasuo, how he's actually good in top lane against a lot of matchups early on, but because he just kind of can't hang with the big bruisery boys up there, in the long term, he just sort of gets outscaled in the lane, even if he outscales overall in terms of the game. In terms of the lane matchup, Yasuo just kind of like gets beaten up after a certain point, because he's just not tough enough. So the similar sort of thing going on there with Mordekaiser with a lot of theoretical counters that might be able to poke him out over the long run. So he's quite good. I think, anyway. I think he's probably, just to move topics a little bit again, he's probably actually going to be a fairly good thing to exploit in when he first comes out, if you can maybe play him in ranked or whatever, if you have a good handle on him. If people don't clue into the fact that just how oppressive he is and they don't ban him and stuff like that, or like ban and pick him. I think his numbers are quite good. And again, he does have counterplay, but people take a while to realize what counterplay is. I think he's one of those characters that people are going to whine about a lot just because, again, he's very oppressive, especially once he gets it going, and he is very, very hard to kill. Juggernauts, even if they're not necessarily the most imbalanced sort of archetype, I think they're the kind of thing, along with tanks, are the things that people will complain about the most because they will seem like they're the most overpowered. Even if like a hard carry that's going to murder everyone is technically might be most damaging to the game balance-wise, it's not as noticeable because people have this expectation. Oh, the killing thing, the carry's supposed to kill you. And they do it really quick. It's like painless, you're gone. It's like, oh crap, I got killed, that's done. The tanks and bruisers, or not bruisers, juggernauts and stuff, they kind of like kill you relatively fast, but just long enough that it almost seems painful. And they're also like hard to kill as well. So it's just like, it's really frustrating, and people just, I think, perceive more imbalance there than there often is. And I think Mordekaiser might run into stuff like that, depending on how things work out. We might see some numbers nerfs on him. It's hard to predict what Riot does with that sort of stuff, in relatively short order. But I don't know, I feel like that's also dangerous too, because given that Mordekaiser is largely a walking pile of stats, if you nerf that, well, it kind of straddles that line of is he overpowered or is he underpowered? Not maybe too much middle ground, but we'll see. I will probably be personally playing him on NA, actually. I do like it. It really does remind me of, again, I'm going to keep harping on this, Season 0, Season 1 old Mordekaiser, which I played a lot of and I found very effective. I can't really think of anything else I want to talk about, really. There's some weird interactions with his ult. I feel like that's a separate video if I'm going to do it. So I'm going to give you a quick rule of thumb with his ult here. Basically, if an enemy that you ult does anything that interacts with the map itself, places something on the map as like a field effect, or interacts with the terrain somehow, it'll get nullified. Good example, Alawi tentacles do not work in the Death Realm, or the Shadow Realm, or whatever. What is another one? Rumble ult. You know how he places that damaging thing on the ground? The rockets or whatever they are, those are nullified. Those no longer deal damage. At least the last time I played. This is all subject to change. So on a similar note, I imagine, for example, something like Morgana's puddle, that probably wouldn't work on the Death Realm either. Just generally stuff like that. I've also, seen it cancel a number of passives and all kinds of interesting stuff. But again, totally separate topic. I think there was some other thing I wanted to talk about with... oh, right, numbers. Again, this is based off of his PBE status on Monday, the day before, or 2 days before he's set to go live, on live. It's very doubtful he'll change on the PB. I thought we were going to see maybe a little bit more in terms of number changes, but then again, I thought the same thing about Yumi, and then they didn't actually do that at all until she went live, and then they buffed the crap out of her, in every basically stat category. So the version I'm talking about will most likely hit live, but it could get changed very quickly. So keep that in mind. Anyway, that's about it. I've droned on a while about Mordekaiser. That's sort of most of my thoughts. I've probably forgotten something. There is a lot I can talk about with the characters. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. And yeah, those are my thoughts on the character. Goodbye. Thanks for watching.